Music. Have you ever looked back and felt the weight of the years, but maturity itself seems to elude you? It feels like time is relentlessly rushing forward, but inside there's a sense of incompleteness, as if something important and defining remained in the past, never finding its realization. We're used to thinking that with each passing year, with the arrival of 20, 30 or 40 years, wisdom, self-confidence and emotional stability come naturally, as if they were self-evident. However, for many women, this long-awaited moment of maturity never arrives. Instead, they suddenly realize that life is rushing forward while they remain in place, as if stuck between their present self and the image they always painted in their imagination. Perhaps you're familiar with this feeling when you do everything right, follow generally accepted norms and expectations. But in your soul, there's still insecurity and dissatisfaction, a longing for something more. But what if the reason lies not only in individual decisions and life circumstances, but in something deeper, in a certain scenario that has been formed over many years, starting from childhood and ending with the influence of society? Perhaps you yourself have encountered something similar, when everything seems to be going according to plan, but at the same time you feel disconnected from something important, incomplete, and secretly wonder, is this all? Can't maturity offer something more? Carl Gustav Jung, a prominent psychologist, devoted himself to the study of the complex problem of female immaturity. According to Jung, maturity is not just reaching a certain age, but a deep psychological process that, unfortunately, many never complete. He argued that many women remain emotionally immature not because of any shortcomings, but because of a subconscious resistance to the very trials that are necessary for their personal growth. In this article, we will delve into the hidden aspects of the call. Psychology of female immaturity, analyzing how unconscious patterns of behavior, childhood experiences, and social stereotypes affect their lives. It's important to consider whether the reason for feeling stuck in life lies in something deeper, perhaps in a problem that you have not yet fully realized. Perhaps you've noticed that some women seem to retain youthful enthusiasm throughout their lives, manifested not only in appearance but also in their approach to various situations. At first glance, this may seem like an attractive trait, preserving childlike spontaneity. However, behind this facade often hide more serious and disturbing internal conflicts. Carl Jung christened this archetype puer aeterna, which translates to eternal girl, and it is something more than just a desire to preserve youthfulness of spirit. It is a deep unwillingness to take on the burdens and joys of mature life. Imagine a woman frozen in anticipation, as if life should happen to her rather than being actively created by her own hands. This person is a visionary whose thoughts are constantly occupied with dreams of future prospects, but she does not dare to take concrete steps to turn these dreams into reality. She seems to float weightlessly between the present and the potential, mired in romantic ideals and a striving for unattainable perfection. And since the ordinary rarely corresponds to these lofty fantasies, she is often overcome by feelings of annoyance, dissatisfaction, and emotional vulnerability. However, there is also a darker side to this archetype. Puella Eterna does not just indulge in dreams, she avoids responsibility, difficult decisions, and the mundane realities of everyday existence. She may flit between various hobbies or professional activities, constantly seeking thrills, but rarely shows enough persistence to create something lasting. The thought of settling into a routine or taking on roles that seem too adult to her causes her to recoil, because in her heart, mature life seems suffocating and even frightening. At the very heart of this phenomenon lies emotional dependence, like invisible threads connecting a person to others, so that they can show them the way, confirm their importance, or relieve them of the burden of responsibility. The manifestation of this dependence is not always obvious and straightforward. Sometimes it hides behind a mask of constant seeking of approval, behind an obsessive need for reassurance from others that the decisions made are correct and appropriate. In the depths of her soul, such a person experiences insecurity in her own abilities. she is tormented by fear of loneliness, of possible failure and rejection. It is worth noting that Carl Jung did not consider this problem to be exclusively a female prerogative. He acknowledged the existence of a similar male archetype known as the puer aeternus, or eternal boy. While the eternal boy flees from adult life through rebellion, restlessness, and perpetual wandering, the eternal girl often avoids it through romantic idealism, emotional dependency, and a constant feeling of inadequacy. Both archetypes share a fundamental rejection of a full, mature life, yet their paths of escape differ significantly. It's quite possible that images of familiar people, or even glimpses of self-awareness, are now forming in your mind. Perhaps it's a talented friend who, by the age of 35, has changed a dozen professions but has never been able to dedicate himself to one. Or a sister who enthusiastically takes on new projects but abandons them at the first sign of difficulty. Or maybe it's you, quietly admitting to yourself that the fear of choosing one specific path keeps you in a vicious cycle of anxiety and worry. Recognizing the eternal girl. Archetype is not a reason for criticism, but rather a step toward deep understanding. Carl Jung argued that behind these behavioral patterns lies immense potential for development. When the eternal girl finds the courage to face what she constantly avoids, be it responsibility, the pursuit of emotional independence, or the acceptance of life's inevitable difficulties, the path to genuine psychological maturity opens up. By carefully observing someone struggling to achieve emotional maturity, one can often find that the roots of the problem lie in childhood. One of the most significant factors shaping such immaturity is parenting style, especially overprotective parenting. Let's imagine it this way. From the moment we are born, we begin to learn how to live by making countless decisions. Every scraped knee, every failed exam, or conflict with a friend teaches us important lessons about independence, coping with difficulties, and managing our emotions. But what happens when parents interfere too actively in this process, trying to shield their child from any trouble or complexity? In families where children are overprotected, young beings rarely have the chance to exercise independence in decision-making or learn from their own mistakes. They grow up in a skillfully created cocoon of safety, where parents take on the role of peacemakers in conflicts, soften the blows of disappointment, and remove obstacles before their child even notices them. To a parent's heart, this may seem like an expression of boundless love, but behind this benevolent mask lies a destructive message quietly whispered into the child's subconscious. You are not capable of dealing with life's challenges on your own. As the child grows older, entering adolescence and then adulthood, they find that they lack faith in their own judgment because they have never been given the opportunity to develop it. Even minor decisions such as choosing a future major in university or resolving disagreements at their first job seem like an unbearable burden. Every decision appears enormous and anxiety-inducing because this person has rarely faced real responsibility without someone's all-encompassing support. But the consequences of such upbringing are not limited to this. Lacking experience in overcoming difficulties in early years, these people develop an extremely low level of emotional resilience. When life inevitably throws obstacles in their path, be it job loss, criticism from colleagues, or even everyday stress, it becomes a real crash. Without proper resilience, failures don't just hurt, they seem catastrophic. Small disappointments can trigger emotional breakdowns or a desire to avoid the problem, which further distances the person from coveted independence. In the realm of interpersonal relationships and friendships, such emotional dependency manifests itself very clearly. The subject, prone to it, experiences a relentless need for confirmation of their own significance, approval from others, or someone else's guidance, as they do not possess an internal compass capable of pointing the right way. Outwardly, this may manifest as ordinary insecurity or indecision, but deep down lies an all-consuming fear of making mistakes, rejection, and disappointing loved ones. Here, a paradoxical situation arises. The more actively those around them seek to help, the more helpless the individual feels. Every gesture of support, dictated by good intentions, can only exacerbate the feeling of one's own inadequacy, unwittingly pushing toward further development of emotional immaturity. It's important to emphasize that this isn't about assigning blame, but about striving for understanding. Often parents, shielding their children from any adversity, sincerely want them to have a safe and happy life. However, as practice shows, emotional growth is impossible in a hothouse environment. It only occurs in the process of overcoming difficulties and challenges. If a person grows up without encountering a healthy dose of discomfort, struggle, and even failure, their emotional development is stunted, and they continue to live as if waiting for someone else to tell them what to do. Acknowledging this fact can be painful, but it's a necessary first step on the path to genuine emotional freedom. A lack of emotional resilience often stems not only from overprotective parenting in childhood, but also has roots in deep, unspoken experiences, namely, unresolved traumas. If a person in their childhood or youth encounters a traumatic experience, be it loss, betrayal, neglect, or deep emotional wounds that haven't been fully healed, the development of their emotional sphere can stall. This can be compared to an emotional injury that seems to have healed externally but continues to ache deep inside. Seeking to avoid re-experiencing this pain, the individual subconsciously avoids circumstances reminiscent of the past. In adulthood, such people often find themselves in a vicious circle. They quit their jobs before difficulties arise, destroy friendships, avoid intimacy, seeing it as a threat, or evade responsibility, which causes fear and anxiety. From the outside, this may look like immaturity, but in reality, it's a self-defense mechanism, a strategy developed many years ago to protect against emotional pain. However, this seemingly saving protective barrier has a downside. It turns into a cage, depriving freedom. By seeking to avoid any discomfort, individuals deprive themselves of a valuable chance for inner healing and personal growth. Until a painful wound inflicted in the past is worked through and recognized, the vicious circle will continue, reproducing outdated patterns of behavior, hindering development, and creating a sense of hopelessness and stagnation, while the true cause of what's happening remains undisclosed. It's worth noting that emotional immaturity is formed not only under the influence of personal experience. Often society itself, through subtle pressure and hidden messages that we absorb daily without even realizing it, subtly encourages this state. Just recall the expectations placed on women from an early age to always be pleasant in communication, to always look attractive, and most importantly, to always remain young. Opening an Instagram feed, flipping through the pages of a glossy magazine, or watching a romantic comedy, you can quickly notice a common trend. Society tirelessly promotes the image of a woman as a young, carefree, charmingly naive, and even helpless person. Such qualities are considered cute and funny, and they're endlessly romanticized in mass culture. Remembering favorite heroines of cinema, it's easy to notice a common trend. Often they're eccentric, impulsive, flirtatious individuals whose happiness is inextricably linked to the presence of a man in their lives, be it a lover or a wise mentor, guiding them on the right path. Such characters aren't expected to show maturity and responsibility to the fullest extent, because in mass culture, maturity often appears as something boring and devoid of freedom. In real life, women, like a sponge, absorb this message, learning from a young age that youth and naivety are valuable assets, while maturity, independence, and inner strength can make them less attractive or even scare away potential partners. Society subtly pushes them so that the external impression they make prevails over their true essence. Herein lies a cunning trap. The need for external approval becomes all-consuming. It seems that it's much safer and more profitable, at least in the short term, to adapt to the standards that society applauds, to be sweet, young, compliant, rather than to follow the thorny path of genuine self-development. In modern society, where the cult of eternal youth is elevated to an absolute, the flip side of the coin is often overlooked, the feeling of loneliness and dissatisfaction that haunts those who realize that they've lived a life playing an imposed role instead of developing as a person. Just look at the world of social media, where countless women spend precious time every day creating a carefully crafted image of carefree youth, striving to meet the ideals broadcast from the screens. The pressure to appear eternally young and carefree often forces them to suppress deep desires and ambitions that don't fit the image they've created. Over time, the gap between their true selves and how they are perceived by others widens, leading to anxiety, depression, and a sense of inner emptiness. This cultural narrative, deeply rooted in our daily lives, is not easy to challenge. However, awareness of this dynamic is crucial. True maturity, according to Jung, lies not in abandoning playfulness and spontaneity, but in finding inner strength and independence, freeing oneself from the constant need for external approval. It's about reclaiming one's authentic self from a society that might prefer to see a person as eternally young, dependent, and insecure. If, during today's discussion, you've encountered themes that resonated with the deepest corners of your soul, or perhaps recognized yourself, your friends, or loved ones in the situations presented, the author would be sincerely grateful for your support in the form of a like on this video. Your participation helps spread this content to a wider audience, thereby stimulating important and meaningful discussions. The author also encourages you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you noticed similar patterns of behavior in yourself or in those around you? Perhaps certain moments or ideas particularly resonated with you, prompting you to rethink your own life path. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss new releases. From a very young age, we are surrounded by stereotypical images of the ideal woman, an eternally youthful beauty, radiating energy and remaining timeless. Society instills in us that youth is not just a period of life, but the main criterion of value. As a result, many women, raised in a culture that romanticizes eternal youth, face one of the deepest and most silent fears: the fear of aging. Carl Jung deeply believed that the fear of aging in women is more than just the appearance of wrinkles or grey hair. This fear penetrates the depths of their consciousness, affecting fundamental aspects of identity and self-esteem. For a woman whose life is closely intertwined with the cult of youthful beauty, aging becomes not just a change in appearance, but a feeling of losing her own significance in society. It's worth considering how often in the modern world women are praised solely for their youth and attractiveness. This praise is skillfully woven into the structure of compliments, obsessively broadcast through images in the media, and even penetrates everyday, seemingly innocent conversations. If youth becomes the defining criterion of a woman's worth, what happens when it inevitably begins to fade? This question, like an ominous shadow, looms over women, causing anxiety and turning the natural process of aging into a threat. In an attempt to avoid confronting this all-consuming fear, women often begin to desperately cling to external validation of their attractiveness. They spend a colossal amount of energy and resources on purchasing cosmetic products, resorting to various cosmetic procedures, and obsessively creating an image of eternal youth online. Each like, compliment, or admiring glance only briefly suppresses the deeply hidden anxiety. However, such external validation never brings true satisfaction, but only fuels a vicious cycle of dependence, making women even more emotionally vulnerable and causing them to dread the inevitable changes that age brings. The desire to hold on to fleeting youth turns into a trap of emotional immaturity for many. Instead of cultivating inner virtues such as wisdom, resilience in the face of difficulties, and deep self-knowledge, qualities that flourish with age, such people seem to get stuck in a precarious present, eternally striving for the illusory approval that they believe youth bestows. In this desperate pursuit of eternal youth lies the danger of never truly growing up. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychologist, argued that within each of us lies a hidden side, a shadow, woven from traits that we once learned to suppress because they did not conform to accepted norms and expectations. In women, this feminine shadow often conceals qualities that society is not quick to encourage: strength of character, ambition, independence, and even righteous anger. Imagine a young girl who is repeatedly told to be sweet, meek, and by no means assertive. Whenever she tries to defend her point of view, or asserts her ambitions, she is immediately corrected, being called too pushy or difficult to deal with. Over time, in an effort to earn the love and approval of those around her, she learns to hide these strong character traits deep within her subconscious. However, the difficulty lies in the fact that once driven inward, these qualities do not disappear without a trace. They merely lie dormant, like embers beneath a layer of ash, generating constant inner tension. Each time, fate presents the heroine with the need to demonstrate independence or strength of character. Whether in her professional life or in personal decisions, she experiences a painful sense of discomfort. As a result, she may shy away from promising promotion opportunities, unconsciously sabotage herself, or passively defer decision-making to others. This is not due to a lack of character, but rather because the manifestation of these suppressed traits feels wrong, even dangerous. This constant suppression of her own desires and aspirations keeps women in a state of emotional immaturity. Instead of facing life's challenges boldly and confidently, they find themselves trapped in a passive role, quietly expressing dissatisfaction while fearing to fully reveal their inner strength. In an effort to avoid discomfort, they repeatedly return to familiar patterns of behavior based on dependence and avoidance, thereby condemning themselves to repeat the same disappointments. It's important to understand that acknowledging one's shadow is not an excuse for aggression or cruelty, but rather a return to lost but important parts of the personality. When a woman accepts and integrates her shadow side, allowing assertiveness and independence to once again take their rightful place in her life, she finally breaks free from the shackles of immaturity and embarks on the path to true adulthood. She stops waiting for someone's permission and boldly takes responsibility for her own destiny, becoming the rightful mistress of her life. Emotional immaturity, left to its own devices, subtly permeates all spheres of human existence, determining how friendships are built and how decisions regarding professional activities are made. At first glance, it may seem that these consequences are unrelated, but at their core lie the same emotional patterns of behavior. Consider the example of a person who repeatedly finds themselves in unhealthy, codependent relationships, whether romantic or platonic. It is likely that everyone knows the type of woman who constantly seeks support from friends, partners, or family members, expecting them to guide her in making decisions. She may call her mother 5 times a day, unable to make even the simplest decision on her own, or jump from one relationship to another, not feeling strong enough to exist independently. Any of her relationships begin with enthusiasm, but quickly escalate into an acute need and emotional dependence. Soon, both sides accumulate disappointment and resentment, leading to recurring conflicts and dissatisfaction. However, the realm of personal relationships is far from the only area negatively affected. Let's turn to professional activities. How many women feel cornered or paralyzed by indecision, afraid to climb the career ladder and take on responsibility for fear of making a mistake? It is likely that everyone has met a person who constantly postpones promotions, avoids applying for higher positions, or constantly doubts their qualifications, not because they lack skills, but because the very thought of responsibility seems insurmountable and frightening. In the financial sphere, the consequences of emotional immaturity are equally palpable. It can manifest as reckless spending, spontaneous decisions regarding funds, or complete dependence on another person in matters of financial management, which only reinforces the feeling of helplessness. Instead of taking matters into their own hands and striving for financial stability, a person finds themselves trapped in anxiety, avoiding even discussing monetary issues. Even routine decisions such as signing a lease, purchasing a car, or setting long-term goals seem insurmountable because they are associated with adult life. Deep down, a person is convinced of their unreadiness, inability, or insufficient maturity to take on serious obligations. Each obligation is perceived not as a chance, but as a trap, keeping them in a state of perpetual youth. As an example, consider the story of a talented woman who, by the age of 35, had changed 5 professions, each time hoping that a new job would miraculously solve all her problems, but ultimately experienced anxiety and dissatisfaction again. Or consider the colleague who constantly needs external validation before completing any project, unable to trust their own judgment, creating tension for both themselves and others. Such life scenarios unfold repeatedly because deep emotional programs remain unchanged. Each failure only fuels their deepest fears, reinforcing the belief in their own inability to be independent and achieve success. The real tragedy lies not so much in missed opportunities as in unrealized potential. These women, endowed with remarkable abilities, ambitious aspirations, and innovative ideas, fail to fully realize their potential because their emotional immaturity constantly holds them back. However, there is good news. Recognizing these recurring patterns of behavior is the first step towards liberation, regaining control of one's own life, and finally entering true adulthood. There's no longer a need to hide behind others. Now, one can boldly face life's challenges, relying on one's own strength. Overcoming emotional immaturity is not about forcing oneself into adulthood, but rather a deep journey inward, a process that Carl Jung called individuation. Jung argued that true maturity is defined not by age or achievements, but by the full realization of one's potential, the integration of every hidden, ignored, or suppressed part of the psyche into a unified self. This can be compared to assembling a complex puzzle. Most people live their lives seeing only a few familiar pieces, those aspects of their personality that they are willing to show the world. However, deep down, there are pieces that have been forgotten or rejected: assertiveness, independence, ambition, and even emotions that are considered negative, such as anger or sadness. Individuation is a complex and courageous process of reclaiming lost aspects of personality, recognizing them, and integrating them into the structure of self-awareness. This can be expressed, for example, in recognizing the validity of one's own ambitions, or in understanding that striving for independence does not destroy relationships, but rather makes them stronger. Individuation encourages a person to stop blaming external factors, such as society, upbringing, or past experiences for their failures, and to take responsibility for their life. This process transforms the personality, freeing it from the feeling of being a passive victim of circumstances and endowing it with the ability to actively shape its destiny. Recognizing suppressed character traits, the so-called shadow side, can be painful and require confronting undesirable qualities that a person has avoided throughout their life. However, such a step opens the way to a deep sense of inner freedom and clarity. Decision-making becomes easier as inner conflict disappears. Tasks that previously seemed impossible are now perceived as quite achievable, thanks to emotional readiness to solve them. Ultimately, individuation means finding authenticity, rejecting imposed roles, and confidently asserting one's true essence. A woman who embarks on this path overcomes emotional immaturity and enters a fulfilling adult life, characterized by responsibility, deep self-awareness, and genuine freedom. In this discussion, a matter of exceptional importance was raised, often remaining not fully understood. Emotional maturity is more than just the passage of time and the accumulation of years lived. It is, above all, a willingness to accept those uncomfortable and often hidden aspects of one's own personality that one diligently avoids, obeying social norms, upbringing peculiarities, or painful past experiences. As Carl Jung convincingly demonstrated, immaturity manifested in women is not simply an unfortunate personal flaw, but a phenomenon rooted in the depths of unconscious behavior patterns, susceptibility to cultural pressures, unresolved psychological traumas received in childhood, and, of course, a deep fear of facing one's own shadow side. During the discussion, it became clear how all these factors hinder the development of women, condemning them to dependence, anxiety, and endless cycles of disappointment. However, Jung also indicated a way to break out of this vicious circle, the process of individuation. This path is a journey to self-knowledge, during which a person regains all aspects of their personality, their strength, their ambitions, their assertiveness, and even their vulnerability. This requires deep self-awareness, the courage to confront one's own fears, and finally, accepting responsibility for one's life not because others demand it, but because there is a genuine desire for personal growth, authenticity, and independence. Understanding one's own self is a task that requires considerable effort, but opens up boundless possibilities. Self-awareness provides a clear understanding of one's essence, unwavering confidence in the decisions one makes, and freedom from the exhausting need for external approval. According to Jung, true maturity lies in unconditionally accepting oneself in full, with all strengths and weaknesses, with all convenient and inconvenient aspects. The question is not simply about identifying one's own behavioral patterns, but about a much deeper willingness to accept one's psychological maturity, a willingness to take possession of the integral self, freeing oneself from the shackles of infantilism and dependence, taking the reins of one's own life into one's own hands. It is at the moment when a firm yes is uttered that true life begins, entirely belonging to you.